anything that's sort of in the spotlight, it has a certain glamour attached to it. Although, our glamour was kind of, sort of gutter glamour. I think that at the factory we all thought that, when Andy got the Portapack, we just figured, well, this is an easier way to make the movies, it was kind of just another way to make a movie easier and see the results immediately, and if it wasn't good, you just did it again. I went to film school at Columbia, and we hardly ever got to shooting film, because film was expensive. That revolution was apparent to everybody as soon as it came along. At that time, the circle that I was part of, people were making art, but the same people were in bands. They were directing movies. They were acting in one another's movies. So kind of what was missing in a way was a TV show. At that time, public access was in this sort of infancy period, and even my neighborhood wasn't wired for cable yet. But a friend of mine had this show called If I Can't Dance, You Can Keep Your Revolution. And she asked me to be a guest. I didn't think anything of it. I went on the show. And then over the next few days, all these people said, I saw you on TV. And I couldn't believe it, that anybody was actually watching this stuff.
If I can't dance, you can keep your revolution. And I want to hear.
So they called up my friends and they said, we have to do a show. And we started immediately.
Hi, and welcome to TV Party, the TV show that's a party, but which could be a political party. Tonight's the first night, the debut performance of TV Party, and we'd like to thank you for tuning in, if you're tuned in. And if you're not, would you please tune in fast?
We rented a cheap studio, and it came with 3 cameras, if they were all working, and microphones and a board and all that, and it wasn't that hard to figure out. I'd gone to film school, but the equipment was cheap, and so there are, moments where there's no sound or whatever, and it was all kind of volunteers, but it usually didn't really detract, and in some ways it added. Because to an audience that's used to everything being done in a very formal way, to see shots of people's shoes is funny. When I saw Warhol films and I saw the sort of low-tech, boldly flawed style, we thought that was funny, and we were amused by that, and we liked that it wasn't Stanley Kubrick, 70 millimeter, cinch-around, because it was sort of a kind of modesty that was more like about the individual than about the network or the corporation. This is a sort of guerrilla television, and I think kids like that. They like it if it's not perfect, because it's something you can relate to. It's human. It's also a little bit about realism, I think, because a lot of mainstream entertainment is very hypnotic, but when you're watching something that's jerky, you're very aware of the camera, and you're very aware that this is a show. This is not a dream I'm having.
Television is supposed to make the world one big culture. Well, we never believed that, did we?
The whole ideology of TV Party was that in a democracy, that really the form of government is television. And so we were presenting an alternative kind of television, like the way you would start an alternative political party. And we talked about political issues and maybe in a silly way, but it didn't mean that we weren't serious on some level. We were serious, but we weren't solemn.
Which of the following political symbols is omnipresent? A, television, B, the church, C, McDonald's, and D, Seymour.
We have supercharged ourselves with televisions. And now we can turn the force around and make it work for you!
We had a studio audience, so you did have some, people would laugh or moan or whatever, and Sometimes we would do things to deliberately, not maybe bore, but irritate people. Sometimes we would just sit there and like maybe not talk for 30 seconds, which on TV is kind of really shocking. You know, dead air is like the most, it's like fingernails on a blackboard.
Right now, 30 seconds for meditation. Next. Okay, that's it.
At that time, you had the networks, you had 2 independent New York City stations, you had, I guess, PBS, and then you had public access. So just in sort of TV roulette, there was a chance that people would happen upon your show.
Right now, we're about to take some telephone calls from the New York City audience. If they can read this phone number on the screen, I can't read it.
We would get an idea of how many people were watching when we would do the phone call segment, because if it kept lighting up, we knew there were a lot of people watching. But then we also discovered that a lot of like high school kids were watching, because you know, they thought we were like rebellious. Sometimes the callers were like friends who were disguising their voice. Other times they were just people who, you know, were fans of the show, because we were on at the same time every week, and we did develop a pretty big following, I think.
Well, considering the great lineup we had tonight, I feel really insulted by the telephone, so I don't think we're going to talk to any more of these people unless this one is really good. Hello?
Hey, your show is really good.
Oh, well, thanks.
The number one thing they would do is call up to insult us, or to say, what is this all about? That was one we got a lot.
Hello?
Yeah, hello, you're on.
What's this for? Your mother. I mean, what are you doing on here?
This is on for your education.
Oh, my education.
Yes.
I see.
We stopped for various reasons. I was trying to figure out how to make a living. The scene was just kind of drifting apart. AIDS was starting to, really have an effect. A lot of people, there had been so much drugs in New York that a lot of people were strung out. It never even officially ended. We just kind of, it went like longer and longer between shows. Somebody said, well, how do you feel about so much of TV Party being assimilated into the mainstream? And I thought, well, that's funny. Yeah, I guess in a way it has been. People play with mistakes or do things to kind of be shocking or rebellious. When we were arriving young on the scene, like, galleries were not receptive to what the painters of my generation were making. Record companies were not receptive to the kind of music that the bands of my generation were making. I wasn't going to get picked up by the network or whatever.
Some of the greatest bands ever, the New York Dolls.
Basically, we were trying to entertain ourselves and entertain our friends and be a star in this little world, but that didn't mean that we were disqualified from going farther.
It's time for TV Party!
It started buzzing.